Hello, my name is Rich Howard, owner of Architectural Builder Supply. This video is to bring you a closer look at the Stanley number F179 4x3.5 US10B hinge. So that's a lot of part number, and it's a lot of part number because it means a lot of different things, and we're going to dissect that part number. First, here's what that hinge looks like. This is an F179 4x3.5 US10B. You might notice right off the top that the hinge does appear to be wider than it is tall, and that's because it is. It's 4-inch tall and 3.5-inch wide, and we'll talk about why it's this width as well. So the F179 hinge from Stanley is incredibly common. It's a very typical hinge. It means a number of things, and in no particular order, it means it's a 5-knuckle hinge. You can see why they would call it a 5-knuckle hinge. It's a plain bearing hinge. There are no bearing packets in this at all. If you wanted ball bearings, you'd have to make it an FB. Get the B in there for the ball bearing part number. It means that it is full mortise. You can see from the swag on the hinge leaf there, right at the tip of my finger, the bend on that hinge means that when you close the door and bring those hinge leaves parallel, they're meant to be mortised flush to the edge of the door and frame. It also means that it's made of steel. Okay. Oil rub bronze can be done on a steel base, and this is what it looks like from Stanley. Would some people possibly say that that looks black? Sure. Is it black? No, it's not. It's awfully dark, but the oil rub bronze finish is actually the results of what it will look like are based on many variables. First and foremost, the base material. An F179 is a steel-based hinge. If you wanted a brass-based hinge, you would order the F191, and that will give you a bronze base material, and onto which your finished result would look different than this. The base material has everything to do with it. Many other factors contribute to the oil rub bronze ultimate look. Believe it or not, the altitude at which the factory is located is a variable on what will affect the oil rubbed end result look. Oil rubbed bronze is considered a living finish. It's a marketing term used to describe it's going to change with time, and every single piece that we make is going to look technically different. Manufacturer to manufacturer to manufacturer, all of their oil rub bronze will never be the same. So be mindful of that. If you're ordering oil rub bronze, it would of course be my hope that you understand that our industry terms it as a living finish. It's going to change and is not uniform at all. And the entire point of it is that it evolves with time. Now, people want, when they specify oil rub bronze finish, they want the finish to evolve with time. And a great example of that you can just use your mind's eye and think about it. You have a door, you have a walnut door, beautiful one-panel style and rail walnut door, oil rub bronze hardware everywhere. The door closer, the push and pull hardware, the hinges. Well, the door closer and the hinges will be oil rubbed. The closer may be a metal cover that's oil rubbed, or it might be a plastic sprayed cover. Let's say it's a metal cover that's oil rubbed. The hinges will be oil rubbed. The push and pull hardware will be oil rubbed. How often do you touch the hinge of that door? You never touch the hinge. How often do you touch the push and pull plate? Every time you use that door. The wear pattern that will occur on the push and pull hardware will, over time, reveal the bronze tones of the base material through the finish, as the finish literally is wiped away every time you touch it. Just touching the very corner of the hinge, I have evidence of the fact that I've picked the hinge up, and all I'm doing is just touching the outer edge of the hinge. And when I review a piece of oil rub bronze, I'll always have a paper towel with me, because it gets everywhere. The point of the matter is, when someone specifies oil rub bronze, the hope is that the person specifying it thoroughly understands the process and how it will change with time. We did a project here in Naples, Florida, for a local country club, and they wanted oil rub bronze finish. So my conversation was, let's talk about that. Do you want the finish to change and evolve with time, or do you want it to stay stable? And they said, let's make it stay stable. So what we did was, all the hardware was a powder-coated, oil-rubbed bronze equivalent, a very dark brown, oil rubbed type complementary color that was powder coated, a very durable process of painting. Powder coating is that will give them a uniform look. First uniform, first long lasting, meaning it won't change with time, and then uniform. All the push plates to the lock sets to the door closer, it all looked uniform, especially when you're dealing with trim and auxiliary hardware. Kick plates, pull plates, push plates, wall stops, things like that. All that tied together very nicely. Actually, because the lock sets were bought from the same umbrella company, the lock manufacturer, the exit device, door closer, trim and auxiliary, they're using all the same technology for their oil rubbed, powder coated equivalent paint. So it all worked out really well. Now, let's move on. We've talked about the F179. We've talked about the 10B. We know it's made of steel and it has an oil rub. Why 4x3.5? That is admittedly an unusual hinge. There's no doubt. Why 4x3.5? Well, because your formula, when you're figuring out the size of hinge that you need, tells you 4x3.5 is the best size. First of all, hinges are measured height first. They're the opposite of how doors are. Then width. It's important to know that when you are dealing with hinges. If you've got a 4x4, a 4.5, 4.5, or a 3.5, 3.5, you can live without knowing the height is the first dimension. It doesn't matter. It's square. But when you deal with rectangular hinges, 4x3.5, 5x8, 4.5x4, you need to know the height's the first dimension. If you're prepping the door and frame, important to know that you're not prepping a 4x3.5, 3.5x4. And it does happen occasionally that people use very sound logic of saying, well, the door is 3 foot wide and 7 foot tall. Why are hinges the opposite? Height first and then hinges and kick plates and things of that nature. And I don't know the correct answer, but what I believe is that when you are expressing to someone else, verbally, written, your intent, it is nice to be told the information in the way in which is most logical for concluding the exact part number. What I mean to say is, if I tell you that I need a door and it's 7 foot tall, you might say, okay, great, 7 foot tall. Doesn't tell me much about the door. The point I'm driving at is, tell me it's a 3 foot by 7 foot door. The height is important to know, but in the example of the door, what I want to know first is the width of the door. The most important value, or the one that we would prefer to know first rather than later, is it is indeed the width of the door, but it is the height of the hinge. It would it'd be like telling someone by saying how do I get to my destination, rather than saying left, right, left. You're going to tell them first the speed limit is 35 miles an hour. That's good to know. I just don't need that right now. I need that after you tell me the first part. So doors height is less important than the width in the sense of how you would put those together in terms of a sentence. The height's the first thing. The height tells you a lot about the opening immediately. It can tell you, it can infer the thickness of the door. It can infer the weight of the door. It will infer the frequency of use on the door. If you have an 1 3/4 inch thick door and someone is telling you that it's 4 inch tall, it tells you a lot about that already. Well, first of all, it's probably not a commercial opening. It's likely 1 3/4 inch. It's probably a standard size in terms of width. But if I were to tell you that I have a 5x4.5 hinge, now I'm thinking, okay, commercial, most certainly commercial. Probably wider than average. Might be higher frequency than average. The point is the first thing tips us off. And then the second dimension kind of solidifies what the requirements are. So 4x3.5. The bottom line is when you're determining the width of the hinge that you need, and when you measure the hinge, you just lay it out in front of you. Open it up, height, and then width. There's a formula for doing this. The formula is, here's the formula for determining hinge width. Door thickness times 2. Pardon me, start over. I've already made a mistake. Starting over. Door thickness minus your back set. The back set is the amount of the door that you are not mortising out for the hinge. So if you had an 1 3/4 thick door and you mortised it, you're probably going to leave a 1/4 inch worth of the door that you've not chiseled through. That's the back set. So door thickness minus back set times 2. Here's our example. That's only part of the equation. Door thickness is 1 3/4 minus 1/4 inch back set is 1.5 inches times 2 is 3 inch. Okay. So right now we're at 3 inch. You add to it your inset, which is the dimension from the face of the door to the face of the frame. I said that backwards. The face of the frame to the face of the door. The door can be flush. If you stood on the pull side and ran your hand over the face of the door and frame, not the casing, but the jamb itself, it could be flush. Aluminum storefront is very commonly flush. It could also be inset, 1/8 of an inch or a little bit less. But you add that inset dimension, if one exists, to your 3 inch. Let's say it's inset 1/8 of an inch. Now we're at 3 1/8. Then you add any clearance that you need to get out and around. Let's say you had brick molding attached to that jamb that was 3/4 thick. Add 3/4 to your 3 1/8. Now you're at 3 7/8. You go to the next largest size, that's the size hinge you need. So 3 7/8, the next largest is 4. In that scenario, because of that brick mold, I need a 4-inch wide hinge. But if we back up and we're doing the same job, interior door, 1 3/4, 1/4 inch back set times 2 is 3 inch, plus 1/8 of an inch, but I had no clearance that I needed to get out and around. Meaning clearance is when I have my door and I go all the way to 180, how much room do I need from the face of that item or the face of the wall, whatever's projecting, to the inside face of my door? If that is 0, then you go to the next biggest size that's commercially available. In this case, it would be 3 1/2. And that's whether the client realized, I believe the client certainly knew what size to order. This is a company that specializes in woodworking. They would have known, because of the formula, that 3 inches, the 3 1/2 is the right size. The point of why that's important is projecting hardware out into the opening is never preferred when it can be avoided. You don't want hinge barrels hanging out on the pull side of the door into the opening. The next time that you are in your favorite coffee shop, notice the hinges on the bathroom door, and you'll say to yourself, yeah, the barrel of that hinge sticks out further from the face of the frame than it really needs to. And that's the reason. The reason for that is because the hinge was supplied as a 4.5 by 4.5, where in those applications it should be 4.5 by 4. It's a nuance. Does it matter? Yeah, it does matter. It's considered best practice. You know, you get points off on the test if you don't calculate the right width of hinge. Plus, you want the weight of the door to be as handled as economically as possible by your hardware. Do I want my vertical axis of pivoting out here, or do I want it as close to the center of the thickness of the door as possible? The latter. I want it over as far as possible. So using that formula, which I'm going to show you where you can locate it for future reference, should be something that you're always mindful of. You know, if you're replacing existing hinges and they're 4x4, you might ask yourself, do they need to be 4-inch wide? Would it be smarter to have 3 1/2? That same country club had 5x5 hinges on their 1 3/4 thick doors, and they had no clearance requirement. And I said to the client, you know, the formula tells me you just need a 4-inch wide hinge. It would be better looking. It would handle the weight of the door better. These were 3'6" by 8', a pair of mahogany doors with decorative glass. Not ultra heavy, but by no means light. And my logic was, no one noticed that the hinge barrel stuck out far wider than it needed to, but mechanically it wasn't as sound as it could otherwise be. Brought it to the client's attention, and they said, nah, just put 5x5s on there. We want them to look just the same way. Okay, but best practice would have been running the formula. 1 3/4 minus 1/4 inch times 2 plus your inset, next commercially available size. I did have a little clearance requirement that would have pushed me to a 4-inch hinge. And a 5x4 is not an uncommon hinge. So now we get to oil rub bronze. Oil rub bronze is just one of many finishes that Stanley can do. Stanley's been in business for 170 years, I'm going to guess. It's steel base, so onto the steel base, they can do prime coat, bright, they can do black, they can do your brasses, your bronze, your chromes, your nickels, satin polished. It's Stanley. They can do lots of different finishes. Let's switch to the screen view where we can take a look at some supporting documentation. Okay, so here is the item that we are indeed looking at. F179 4x3 US10. Great. For use on interior, exterior doors, all of this is really just boilerplate. The hinge is 130 thousandths thick. That would be considered a standard weight hinge. There's residential weight, which is about 96 thousandths. There's standard weight, which is 130 thousandths. And if you had a heavyweight hinge, which you'd have to get to a 4.5 inch, it'd be 180 thousandths. And the thickness of the leaf is related to the hinge height as well. If you had a heavyweight 4.5, it's 180 thousandths. If you had a heavyweight 5 inch, it's 190 thousandths. So, boilerplate material here. Removable hinge pin, plain bearing, standard weight, steel base, 5 knuckle. Okay. Let's look at the tech drawing first. And some of these documents may or may not apply. Let's look. So the F179 is here. And it's going to give you your F dimension from the edge of the leaf to the swag line. Some people like to know that. And it is certainly listed here. F179 4x3.5. It's 1 5/16. Okay. That's where the bend starts. The location of your holes is also listed here. You might say to yourself, well, how do I know if the new hinge is going to fit in the old location? Well, measure. Take a look. This is the industry standard for what we would call a template pattern on the hinge screw hole locations. So every single hinge made to a template pattern is going to match these same locations. 1 1/16 margin between the hinge leaf when it's closed, when the door is closed. Okay, so that's our template. Installation template, not sure what that is. This document doesn't really apply. This is just a generic document from National Hardware, which I believe is a subsidiary of Stanley somehow. Hinge size, also less than important. What's really going to be important, it's going to be the following. Here is a link to the manufacturer's page. If you click on that, we're going to look for my old trusted version, my 2010 architectural hardware catalog. And this document, this is the catalog. It's about 10 years old. It's the governing document when it comes to Stanley hinges, at least as they existed in 2010. All of it still applies. And what I mean by that is the first portion of the catalog is an encyclopedia. It's a dictionary. It's a reference document. It's a technical manual as it pertains to the world of hinges. Okay? Now, you will get a right proper education on hinges if you went through and read that. And if you work in the door and hardware industry and you're relatively new, this is 30 minutes very well spent. It will be quite liberating to understand the terminology as it applies to hinges so that you can be more capable and confident when people are speaking to you about hinges, because there's lots of weird variations. You know, half surface swing clear like this. How often do you see these? Well, you do see them actually. They do exist. I've certainly seen them. Half mortise swing clear. So, first thing I want to show you where to find formula to determine hinge width where additional clearance is needed. This is the exact formula that I went through, and it shows you how to determine what you need. So I would refer to this all the time when you are not sure of what you should be ordering. So if you had like that bathroom door in your favorite coffee shop, there's no clearance because it's a knockdown drywall frame over a partition wall, that there's no casing, there's no brick mold, there's no deep inset, there's none of these facets that would require a wider hinge. Door weights, frequency of use, all kinds of information. So I'm going to scroll through it and get to the cut sheet for our F179, which will take a little bit of scrolling to get to, because I have to get to the 5-knuckle part of the catalog. All right. So they're going to start with their good hinges first, the CB, the concealed bearing. Those are slip-in hinges. Those are for old-style aluminum frames. All right, here's our F179 cut sheet. We'll give you an overview of the item. Also, we'll show you the other sizes it's available in. 3.5 by 3 is not unheard of. We sell those. 5 by 4 I mentioned earlier. Okay. Now, you're saying, well, 5 by 5, don't they make bigger hinges than that? Oh, yes, they do. You just have to go to a thicker hinge leaf, and then you're going to see much larger hinges, and maybe even in a concealed bearing or a 3-knuckle hinge versus a 5-knuckle hinge. CB168 is a concealed bearing heavyweight hinge. They'll get you all the way to 8 by 8 on those really huge hinges. The leaf thickness is 203 thousandths of an inch. So super thick, thicker than 3/16. So a really neat reference to the catalog here. Now, assuming that this hinge is likely used in a residential application, you can certainly do decorative tips as well. Ball tip is the most common of all decorative tips. The tip that is on the hinge now is called a button tip. If you use your imagination, it looks like the button on your coat. Crown tip is unique to Stanley. No one else that I'm aware of has a tip called crown. If you were to knurl this, it would look like an acorn tip. Steeple tip, urn tip is another one. There are manufacturers who have custom square tips and all kinds of variations on decorative tips. Ball is by far the most common. And then lots of variations of hinges. And I would very much recommend that you review the entire Stanley catalog. And it's because they are an absolute comprehensive provider of hinges. Whether you're doing a 3 by 3 hinge for a 1 3/8 lightweight door that you have, or you need 8 by 8, or you need anchor hinges, or you need electric transfer hinges, or you need those really odd half surface swing clear hinges because you have, 5-foot by 10-foot doors in a loading dock that may have a monorail prep in them. And when those doors get opened, you need to get them thoroughly removed out of the opening. And you want half surface because you might have done a retrofit application where the original full mortise hinges failed, the hinge reinforcements failed. So you'll see those things all the time. Okay. Now this link to the manufacturer's page that we picked up here will allow you to review not only all of the Stanley products we sell, but that great catalog, that 2010 catalog. Now, in our site, we also have that link I just clicked onto the manufacturer's page, the bottom, or at least currently the bottom right of center in our site. If you search for Stanley and you go to Stanley door hinges, we now call it apparently, different catalog page, they have newer versions of that Stanley catalog of their hinges, continuous hinges, for instance, are in there as well. So more resources for you to review. Let's wrap up this video on camera. Now, a few things in closing. What's nice about Stanley is, well, a number of things. First of all, I personally am a big fan of their fit and finish. This overlap, this oil situation, that's normal. You're going to get that on an oil rub bronze hinge. They're always going to have them. It has everything to do with the way that those leaves touch each other and how the material, behaves during its transit from the factory. Screws are included in a complementary finish. This has all wood screws and all machine screws. Do not assume that they're gonna send you the right screws. Best practice, proper way to specify is to tell us what screws you need. AWS, all wood screws. AMS, all machine screws. You might say half wood, half metal. Specify it so that there's no guesswork. Why there would be machine screws in a 4 by 3.5? Yeah, because they're steel frames that are for 4-inch tall hinges. They exist. If you were to order a 3 by 3, I really couldn't think you'd need machine screws. Conversely, if you were to order an 8 by 8, You know, if they didn't send all wood screws, I would say, If it was 4.5 by 4.5, I would say you could use all wood screws, but you probably need all machine screws. The point of the matter is, we don't want to get the call Saturday morning that you have, oil rub bronze, 6 by 5 hinges, and they didn't send enough wood screws, or an 8 by 6, or something unusual, or a unusual finish, because they're just not sitting on the shelf. Stanley manufactures stuff in Asia, so we want to eliminate the possibility of there being a mistake. Proper industry standard practice would be to specify. If you don't, it's not Stanley's fault, because in their catalog they specify, here's what we're going to send. And their obligation is to not deviate from that. Another thing I like about Stanley, other than their fit and finish, they always include cardboard shims. Now, it's nice to be able to take these cardboard shims. If you have to tip your door in or out, if you have to cant the door in or out, if you have to move it this way or that way, you can, because they include cardboard shims. They're not the only people who do it, but they do, and that's nice. Another nice thing about Stanley is that their name is quite ubiquitous in the hardware industry and so many others. If you're on a project and they specify, if they specify some hinge and you want to supply Stanley, I couldn't fathom that would be a problem upon receipt of approval. The name is synonymous in our industry. I happen to like their fit and finish, the way that the leaves work together. They must have a very good command over the manufacturing process, and I'm always happy to see the finished product when it crosses my desk, because it looks like it's made by people who understand how hinges work. Now, having said that, don't underestimate how much work goes into manufacturing a hinge. I've seen hinges made. I've seen steel doors made. Steel doors are easy compared to hinges. Hinges are an awfully dreadful, dirty, laborious, time-consuming endeavor. The finishing process alone is its own science. That link below the video will help you get to those other resources, and if you have any questions on the Stanley F179 4x3.5 US10B oil rub bronze hinge or any other Stanley product, please feel free to reach out to us. And thank you.